Sunspots, Chapter 3, Part 2.
This is a fairly new edition, relatively speaking. A few sculptures and artwork added on the way to the main museum section of the castle,
The royal guard stated, gesturing to a few odd pots and paintings that lined the stone walls. Nakao nodded his head in interest, the hippogriff then examining a rather ornate vase. Interesting. Sir? Nakao gestured to the pot with a claw, indicating a simple signature near the bottom. I think this one is labeled wrong. The guard blinked, examining the plaque with a shrug.
I just know the general layout of the palace. I wouldn't know, sir.
Oh, I would!
A voice piped up, a young yellow unicorn mare trotting over with a smile.
Museum Assistant Parchment Noel. So what's this about a wrong label?
Nakao smiled at the peppy mare, indicating the vase with a claw again. Oh, it's just that this says it's an artifact originally made by Steadyhoof, but it is in fact one of his successors instead. Parchment blinked, eyeing the item curiously.
How do you figure that? I've looked through the records of all these artifacts and it seems to match up, but history can be spotty at times.
May I? Nakao asked, moving a set of claws towards the pot, prompting the mare to nod.
Ordinarily, no, but I'm curious, so you can go ahead and examine it. There's a few protective spells on it in case it's dropped.
Parchment remarked. Picking up the vase, the hippogriff turned it over in his claws, showing another matching signature on the bottom of the item. Ah, see here? Steadyhoof wouldn't have also signed it on the bottom. All of his successors used the formal writing of his name and put two signatures on the vase. While this was common practice and entered in the history books, it's a slight incomplete account. The embarrassing truth was that Steadyhoof wasn't his real name. The poor stallion took it on in a social attempt to compensate for a lifetime ailment where his hoofs trembled. His signatures were not this neat script as you see here, but a wavy cursive to accommodate the tremor. His assistants used the formal script for their practice pieces, and his eventual successors carried on that view. The hippogriff's eyes then widened, Nakao setting the vase back down. At least that's what I've found in my travels and readings. Parchment's green eyes were wider in wonder, the mare happily prancing in place.
Where did you find all of that out? I knew Steady had an accident when he was a foal, but I didn't know that wasn't even his real name. That makes sense why some of his history books use wheat mill in reference to him.
Nakao smiled, the ecstatic mare's attitude rather infectious. It was in a few old volumes I came across in my travels. The pages were so fragile I had to use a feather-tufted stick to turn them. The hippogriff's blue eyes narrowed briefly, the doctor taking a long look at the mare for a moment. Parchment. Wait, I thought you looked familiar. I treated your mother for a split hoof as a filly once. I thought we'd have to take off the entire limb after it got infected. Is she doing well? The mare looked a bit confused, nodding as her ears perked back up.
Well, that's interesting, and yeah, she's doing fine. She and my father are on a vacation, actually. Small world.
As they said their goodbyes and Nakao trotted down the hall with his guard, the mare's ears twitched in curiosity. Trotting back down to the primary museum area, Parchment then paused, eyes widening in shock.
Wait, my mom? Hold on a minute, what in the world?
She retrieved a bit of expensive parchment from her saddlebags, the enchanted item addressed to her parents.
Hey, Mom and Dad. Sorry to interrupt your vacation, but I just met the most interesting individual. I had no idea that when you were little, you had to deal with...
As the two guards and large hippogriff trotted down the hallway bordering the royal gardens, Nakao's ears twitched as a magical tingle ran up his spine. Something's off. His hunch was confirmed as the nearest windows shattered, a handful of creatures bursting into the hallway. The doors in front and behind the group were yanked shut by a unicorn's magic, a spell sealing them against the outside castle and trapping the three in the hallway. A minotaur spun a set of bolas, their cords crackling with the spell as he threw the weapon at the guards. The two ponies were caught completely unaware, slamming into each other as the bolas wrapped them up in a vice-like grip. As three unicorns, a minotaur, and two griffins balanced a varied set of weapons in their grips, two pegasi hovered outside the window, a crossbow held in their hooves. Nakao spotted the archers out of the corner of his eye, the hippogriff turning to angle his body slightly. The bolts flew from their strings, slamming into the doctor's side, and then clattered to the ground, their poisoned tips not having touched his flesh. The hippogriff's entire frame shimmered, a concealment spell temporarily failing. The two bound royal guards couldn't keep their jaws from dropping, the figure in front of them now being clad in a strange, tightly knit chainmail. Thin gray metal gauntlets wrapped around Nakao forelimbs, the hippogriff letting out a frustrated hiss as he yanked a dagger from a holster on his shoulder.
Please don't do this.
The hippogriff begged, the assailants not so much as uttering a word as they expertly fanned out, weapons drawn.
Don't do this.
Nakao pleaded again, looking at the gathered creatures. None of them even bore so much as an inkling of expression on their features.
Don't make me do this.
At those words, one of the bounty hunters laughed, the griffin then darting forwards with a spear without another word. Two of the unicorns charged their horns, and the minotaur ready to battle axe. A very unfriendly growl slipped from the hippogriff's beak as he settled into a fighting stance.
Fine.
As the spear was thrust towards him, Nacreus's limbs coiled like springs, and the massive hippogriff jumped. Wings flaring slightly, the doctor landed on the spear shaft, snapping the weapon in half. His dagger lashed out, burying itself into the offending griffin's throat. A magical blast from the unicorns was absorbed by one of the hippogriff's raised gauntlets, the strange gray metal seeming to dissipate the spell into nothing. The minotaur swung his axe, even as the griffin partner attacked with a saber. Digging into Nacreus's gauntlet, the axe didn't manage to pierce the odd metal, instead becoming lodged in the armor. As the minotaur struggled to wrench it free, the hippogriff hopped, body twisting as though in the middle of an odd dance, as he lashed out with a rear limb, dodging the swipe of a saber. The metal-shod hoof caved the minotaur's skull in, the creature dropping without a whisper. Yanking the battle axe free, Nacreus balanced the weapon in his claws, sending it spinning into the chest of the griffin with a flick of the wrist. The unicorns and two pegasi now dove forwards, two more arrows deflecting harmlessly against the chainmail. However, they greatly underestimated the hippogriff's reach, and Nacreus grabbed one of them by a hoof, sending them slamming into the stone wall with a brutal toss. The second pegasi was brought down by one of the unicorns panicking, firing a spell that neatly turned the pony into ash. His gauntlets deflecting the oncoming spells, Nacreus almost casually grabbed one of the unicorns by the throat, his claws tearing through exposed flesh. As the assailant dropped into a lifeless pile, the hippogriff grabbed another unicorn's horn, sending the pony's head cracking into the stone floor with a twist of his arm. The last unicorn could only stare at the blood-covered hippogriff as he reached the top half of the spear. Trotting over to aim the weapon at the pony's throat, his claws wrapped around the pony's torso as Nacreus pinned the horrified mercenary to the wall.
Why did you attack me? What are the details? Speak!
Nacreus's voice made the glass on the ground tremble, deep and commanding in tone and rivaling the royal Canterlot voice in volume. The unicorn began babbling, shaking his head and finally collecting his thoughts into a somewhat coherent form as Nacreus pulled the spear back ever so slightly.
The bounty cult wanted you dead. All I know, leader knew more. Supposed to be an easy job.
The unicorn spouted off, then sliding to the floor as Nacreus let him down. The hippogriff didn't take his eyes off of the assailant as he cut the guards loose, both of whom looked to be in various stages of shock. Fishing into one of the guard's side satchels, Nacreus retrieved a magical suppression ring, calmly placing it around the still blubbering unicorn's horn. His feathers shimmered, the armor and shoulder sheath vanishing as the concealment spell activated once again. Nacreus yanked the dagger free from the dead griffin on the floor. He wiped the blood off before sheathing it, the weapon vanishing in an instant.
You're not gonna die, so stop sobbing.
Nacreus sighed, looking at the bloodied hallway as the distant door burst open, a handful of royal guards galloping in. Two of the younger ponies promptly looked at the scene and vomited, the hippogriff wincing slightly. A rune was quickly sketched on the ground, and the bodies were quickly covered by a strange, shimmering field of magic, blocking them from view temporarily.
Better?
Nacreus asked, seeing the guards stare at him, one of them finally able to speak.
What in the world happened?
Opening his mouth to respond, Nakao shook his head, gesturing to the unicorn and two previously bound guards. Assassination attempt. They came in through the windows. Please take care of these three first. I'd be more than happy to follow one of you to give a full report. The in-question guard looked around, and then to her shocked companions and nodded, eyes wide behind the respirator on her muzzle.
I think that would be best.
Celestia stared at the report in front of her, eyes wide in utter shock as she read the word-for-word transcript.
You took on 8 bounty hunters?
The alicorn muttered to herself. Nakao is currently being asked to remain in a guest room under guard while they investigated the incident. Thus far, his story seemed to line up, and there was no evidence the hippogriff was anything but a victim in all this. The testimony of 2 royal guards was certainly a solid alibi.
How in the world? And a concealment spell? Luna was right about keeping you under observation.
A knock sounded at the door, a magical field shimmering around the entrance to kill any possible germs.
Highness?
A soft voice asked, prompting the ruler's ears to perk up.
Come in.
A masked mare trotted in, a guard nodding to her knowingly.
They said I should tell you this. It's about the hippogriff.
Oh? Do take a seat. Parchment, is it? I swear I don't bite.
The assistant curator nodded, surprised eyes widening behind the rebreather mask, which kept her germs from contaminating the room.
Yes, and I know, it's just,
A soft chuckle reached the pony's ears. Celestia adjusted herself on the couch as she looked over to the mare.
It's alright, I understand your nerves. I really am curious, though. What did you want to tell me about our guest?
Parchment shifted nervously, finally letting out a sigh as she retrieved a paper from a side satchel.
I thought it wasn't a big deal at first, just a really knowledgeable guy. He knew a ton about one of the sculptors, even picked out that the vase we had on display wasn't an original. It matched up with history books, but the way he spoke about it, it was familiar. I didn't think much about it, though, not until he mixed me up. Huh?
Parchment gestured to the paper, neat cursive written across it.
The doctor. He said that he treated my mom for a split hoof. I didn't even know that about her, and there's a reason for that.
The mare's brow furrowed, trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
My mom never had a split hoof, but my great-great-grandma did. I confirmed it by writing to my parents. I've been told that I look just like my grandma, though.
Celestia's eyes widened in shock, the alicorn swallowing the lump that was beginning to rise in her throat.
But that story was apparently passed down and written in our family journal. I just hadn't heard of it until now. I don't get it. He doesn't look that old, but neither does Star Swirl. Maybe some sort of spell? I don't know. But I thought you should know.
Making sure her surprise was now masked, Celestia nodded knowingly, a soft smile on her muzzle.
Thank you, Parchment. I think that is indeed something I needed to know. Thank you again for bringing that to my attention.
As Parchment left, Celestia stared at the report in front of her, eyes widening as a simple but extremely important fact branded itself across her mind. It joined the other strange pieces of information concerning the helpful hippogriff, his connection to the First Wisher, his recalling of her encounter with the Hydra, the dispatching of 8 assassins, and the knowledge of the older vase. However, this fact was rather telling, and had been bothering the ruler ever since she had met the doctor. Unlike other hippogriffs, Nakao wasn't wearing a pearl shard around his neck. Okay, hear me out. Whenever I hear or even say Nakao, it sounds a lot like necrophilia. Anyway, let's get on to our not weird donators. Top donators: Jessie Smith, Zar630, BadassWaffle, Only One Thing, Ceru, Orion, and Caladis. Magic, Jock, Luciisu, Darkside, Rayden, Runescythe, Will, Twinkie, Luigi, Chancer Crest, Big Smoke, Murder Princess, Little Mighty, Solar Symphony, and many more amazing people. Thank you all so much for watching this video and love that to the fullest.